Super. Well, I don't know how many of you are local, but I'm sure many of you probably do know that Dorridge first started to appear as a small community of about 8 cottages, which was shown on early maps in, of all places, Packwood Gullet. But it didn't really start growing until George Muntz granted some land for a station to be built. Well, he and his brother were both very keen on expanding the expanding railway networks that were occurring at that time. And in fact, Philip did become chairman of the Birmingham and Oxford Junction Railway. Well, George owned the land that also included what is now known as Dorridge Park, with Dorridge House on the, oh, hang on. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if you can, I hope you can see the map there, but we've got Dorridge House down here on the corner there. We've got what it's called Knoll Station there because that's how it started. And you've got the Forest Hotel just there. And what will be St. Philip's Church in a few moments when we chat about it there. Okay. Well, it's incidentally, Dorridge House, just out of interest, did move down the road a little bit later. It went down to the corner of Clyde Road, and Dorridge House, as it's known there, became the Dorridge. Well, the grant actually stipulated that trains must stop at Dorridge in the morning and evening, both going to Birmingham and to London. And it's interesting, Philip's son William lived out at Umberslade Hall. And in fact, it was him who built the Forest Hotel opposite the railway station, so that he and the family and friends could stay there and catch the early morning trains to Birmingham or to London. Well, as a result of that railway, the village grew, and in 1873, an appeal was launched by the vicar of St. Giles Packwood, which is the parent church of St. Philip's, by the way, or used to be the parent church of St. Philip's, to help build a church in Dorridge. This church was supposed to seat about 200 people at a cost of about £2,000. When it was eventually built, however, it had cost £1,000 and seated about 120. And it was called St. Philip the Evangelist Chapel of Ease. And that is as it was then without the chancel and Lady Chapel. The village continued to grow, and by 1893 the church was considered too small, and a new appeal was launched to expand the church by adding a new stone chancel and vestries. This was to be designed by J.A. Chatwin, a well-known architect in Birmingham. Actually, it wasn't one of his better works when it finally got built, but anyway, he was well known. Funds were raised to build the chancel and Lady Chapel and vestry at a cost of £2,300. And this was added to the existing brick-built structure. And it was hoped that the congregation would raise the funds to complete the church. This is how it was supposed to look when finished. It's quite grand, and it was supposed to seat about 400 people. It would have indeed been really good. However, the work started, but funds ran out in 1898. And I'm afraid that is what we've got now. If look at this is an old photo from the 20s, looking across at the church. And this is the chancel and Lady Chapel. And just behind it, you can see the brick structure of the old Chapel of Ease. You'll probably recognize that now, I hope, very much so. That's the church that you probably should all be able to see now in, or used to be able to see, sorry, in Manor Road. Over a period of time, additions were added. We saw the hall go up in 1969, and then the link here, that went up in 85, and it served its purpose. It did a good job, but it was getting a little bit tired. So in 1996, Bishop John Austin visited, and yeah, he took a tour of the church and decided that in his sermon that he would encourage the congregation to think about a new church that would surprise and delight. Well, actually, the consideration for that was put on hold because we suddenly got an opportunity to expand Bentley Heath School, to grow the hall. So the congregation collected funds, about 390,000, I think it was in the end, and we put an extension onto the hall of Bentley Heath School, which, yes, we were able to use as a church, but also the school could use when we weren't using it, obviously during the week. Anyway, in 2003, discussions restarted following the completion of that project, and plans were actually approved then to add disabled toilets under the new legislation, but it was considered rather too expensive to build a new church. But then in 2011, new ideas started to flow and the project was relaunched. The PCC took a decision to demolish the site. They didn't take that decision lightly at all. In the run-up to that, we looked at multiple ways of trying to develop the site, keeping part of the church as a ruin almost, building around what was there, but there were problems. Really, and it really came to light as we were demolishing the church now. The materials that they used, because I guess they weren't that wealthy, were very poor. As the stonemasons were taking out the various bits for the window this time, they said, oh, this stone is terrible. We said, aren't you going to keep it and use it? They said, no, it's just too poor. So the materials that we used, sadly, were poor. The foundations were not good. And in fact, as the quinquennial reports, these are 5-yearly reports that the church has to have done for the diocese, were indicating subsidence and problems. And you'll see a bit more of that in some photographs later on. But so sadly, it wasn't looking very good for the church. And in fact, we then had an incident in the church where some debris fell from the roof, narrowly missing the vicar, I hasten to add, and several other pieces fell, and a decision was taken that we could no longer safely use the church itself. We'd also had a lot of flooding going on in the hall, which really, again, had needed work doing to it. It was struggling. Its roof was bad. Its the pop-in itself, it really wasn't a good place to go. So, sorry, the decision was the best thing we can do for everyone is demolish it. And when we did actually look at trying to have it underpinned, and we took some advice, but they said, well, you're probably talking $500,000 or so to get the thing into a stable position again, and there's no guarantee that it won't go haywire again. So to protect future generations, really, it underscored the decision to say, let's demolish the whole site and start again. So how do we go about it? Well, obviously, we set up an initial team that we're going to do some market research. It's very wise, I think, in any project like this to establish what's wanted, what's expected. Obviously, that research involved talking to the congregation. It was the church that they'd become used to. And so they were asked. The users of the church hall and church were asked. The community was asked. Some of you may have been asked, you may have received questionnaires, you may have received interviews, I don't know. We did quite a large sample in the community. And we then, from that, produced a specification, which became the tender, or what was to be the tender spec. This was quite a meaty document, quite extensive, but it detailed everything that was needed, strategies, what was good about it, what was bad about it. But it was analysed from all of the questionnaires and stuff that had been put to use. Well, in 2012, with that specification, we said, let's go out to tender and find a partner to work with. At that stage, we decided not to go with an architect. We decided to go for design and build. There are a lot of reasons for that. I guess I'd had a lot more experience with design and build that worked, as opposed to architects that can actually cost you a fortune as the project develops. So we took that decision. The PCC were happy to follow that path. And in fact, it has paid out really to do it that way. It's really paid off to do it that way. So we then submitted to 3 potential companies to tender for that work. And of the 3, Kier Construction Midlands was selected. Obviously, over the past while, they've had a checkered history, and believe me, they've caused some anxiety to us as the decision we took. We did wonder what we'd done, but I guess someone was watching over us. And in fact, Kier have come through, and in fact, their results recently have just proved that they are in fact on the, I think, the upward rise again. Okay, we now had to develop the design. So we got a specification, but then we had to come up with a design. So again, the team came together. This time it was quite a multidisciplinary one from all walks of life, and it was discussed how the church would look and what it should, how it should function. There was lots of feedback and lots of communication. Communication was pretty vital. We did it back into the congregation itself. We did it outwardly to the community. That was either through websites or through emails or through, in fact, mail shots that we put out through many of the, a lot of you may have received communications over the years as this project has evolved. We also had to communicate with something called the DAC, the Diocesan Advisory Committee, but I'll tell you more about that later. Okay, design parameters. We were looking to actually try and establish a place that, yes, would surprise and delight. We had structural considerations. We were also very concerned that it fitted the, it had a visual attraction. It fitted the street scene, quite frankly. We were very concerned that it maintained a right look on the street and hopefully would prove to be fairly timeless. So we also wanted to minimize site damage. Our design was to have to take out minimum trees. In fact, we lost virtually, well, I think we only lost 1 tree that was reasonable. Any other trees that came down were condemned by the council or by this arboricultural report, I can't say that word, which was a massive document again that did a huge survey of every single tree on the site. Yes, I'm sure you may have had to do that if you've done local stuff in your garden or in the house, but this was a massive thing, couldn't believe it. We then did, we wanted to make sure that the building was energy efficient. We'd hoped we'd get close to an A rating, but it's very, very hard to hit an A. We actually hit just below, just into a B. I think the score was about 35 or something like that, but we were pretty content with what we got out of that. Again, the report that came out, it went with the planning application, and it shows that we'd gone through all the options of how we would operate the business, the equipment we use in it to make it really environmentally very, very friendly. Sorry, I won't bore you with that one, it's a bit excessive. Heating options obviously feature in that. We looked at all forms of heating. We looked at ground source air pumps, we looked at air source heat pumps. Obviously, solar panels came into looking at energy requirements too. And in the end, certainly from the heating point of view, we looked at air source heat pumps. Those will be the items that are installed in the new church. And their energy efficiency is amazing really now. Ground source heat pumps we weren't happy with because, quite frankly, maintaining ground source heat pumps and the underfloor heating that tends to go with them can be quite costly and quite concerning. So we took a decision to go down the air source heat pump option. We then did a heat loss assessment of the structures. Again, as part of making sure that we were getting a building that was efficient, we looked at ways of minimizing heat loss throughout the place. And it was quite staggering really when we looked at the requirements. The government actually have built in a requirement for a rise in climate temperatures by the year 100 of another couple of degrees, and we had to take that into account with the planning application. We obviously had to do the wonderful ecological assessment, looking at bats and birds and the like, including newts, of which we haven't got any, thank goodness. And we were very fortunate, in fact, a local company did it. In fact, one of our parishioners came and did the final one, she lives on Manor Road. We had a separate company to do it initially, so there was no conflict. But once we'd had a clearance, we were able to use them for that work, and they did a great job for us. We wanted this new building to be acoustically superb. That's in its use of materials and the locations of the AV equipment within it. We wanted the new building, or certainly the worship area, which we were going to see as a concert area, to have absolutely superb acoustics. So the location of all the sound equipment within that was critical. We also wanted to make sure that we got minimum noise breakout. We didn't want to annoy neighbours, so we conducted tests and scans with that to ensure that the building that would result would not cause any problems to the neighbours. The acoustics report is a brilliant one. The guy that did it was the one that did the Birmingham Conservatoire, and he looked throughout the building. The blues are really great, the reds are not good. This is the sound qualities, and it absolutely brilliant. But it enabled us to position all of the sound equipment in the right place to do the right job, and hopefully to give a result that any choir, any orchestra, any pop group, anyone would be happy to play there and have good reverbs and all the rest of it, whatever they call it. We were going through the approval process, and obviously Solihull planning, that goes without saying. We then have, because it's a church, we have a thing called a faculty. Some of you may know what faculties are. If you do, I'm sorry, I will go briefly through them. But really, the diocese basically tell you what you can and can't do with the church, even if you're going to knock it down. And this is where the DAC come in, the Diocesan Advisory Committee. They're a body of august fellows, experts, volunteers that actually advise on new buildings, they advise on the use of materials, they advise on suitability and appropriateness. And we had a very good relationship with them, and in fact worked with them for probably about 3 or 4 years. We also have to have the permission of the bishop, you'd expect. And then we have our own very own chancellor. The chancellor is a guy that looks after the ecclesiastical law side of the diocese and is responsible for the plant, the legal ownership of the plant, not the maintenance of the plant. That's all the buildings, the churches in the diocese. So a little bit different to a normal planning application. So we got all our stuff ready, submitted and running concurrently. We got Solihull planning. The architect drove that in a way for us. We had our usual committee meetings. Various objections came up, and we managed to deal hopefully favourably and gently with all of those. They approved us in 2015, and the faculty, we moved into that first of all with an ecclesiastical archaeologist report, and this really is a massive report that develops everything that's good or significant about the building. And we didn't realise there were so many significant things about St Philip's that they came up with. But it's a massive report, so I won't show you that one, but it's huge. But it did bring out a series of items that we have said we will endeavour to include within the new building. And we had to give a location of where we were proposing to put them. This is only the ground floor view, by the way. There's a first floor as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, so we're trying to locate that stuff within the building. So statement of significance we have to produce and analyse. Then we have to say, why do you want to do this? Well, obviously we could argue the case that the building is not safe. It needs a lot of work. It's not quite falling down, but not far off. But nevertheless, we have to produce a document. And this is our document that we then submitted to the diocese, to the chancellor, as part of our application, which involved all of the, we have to give our financial state as well, and the way in which we're going to manage any change. It's quite a comprehensive document, so a little bit more than the Solihull planners want. The faculty process, this is, they have a new, believe it or not, online process that you go through, which does speed it up. But in total, we submitted probably about 150, 170 documents to get approval from the diocese. A meaty task, which we Okay, we finally did. We got a conditional approval in 2016, but they said you've got to have visibility of all funds. Now, a lot of the giving and the offering had been from the congregation and was in the form of pledges. But the Chancellor says, no, that's not good enough. Although we knew pledges were honoured, we hadn't had any fail. He wasn't happy. We said, okay, right, so instead of doing the whole of the building, let's just build the shell and landscape the site. We're confident, we have faith, the funds will come in somehow, some way. So, oh no, you don't, he said, you can't do that. Ecclesiastical law says that if you demolish a church, you have to replace it. That means, we have to now go back to the drawing board. It was a bit of a shock to us, I must admit. We really thought we could do it, but no, wasn't allowed. So we've got to apply now for a new faculty to build the whole facility, landscape the site, and now fully finish the church. So Keir worked with us to produce a revised proposal in 2 phases. Keir have been brilliant through the whole process. I mean, we've worked with them for what, 8, 10 years now. They've never given up on us. They really had faith in us, which is amazing. And I think the way they worked on the site has been brilliant. But anyway, more of that later. Okay, anyway, we got the second application, and in the end it was approved, but still conditional on visible finance. But we were actually close now doing it this way. So we said, can we start, please? We've got all this lot. But planning approvals, as most of you will know, have a finite life. And yes, you can just reapply for planning, but it's not always so simple. Things have moved on, things have changed, requirements have changed, and you're now subject to a whole new raft of requirements. Drainage requirements had changed. We had to redo all the tanking around the periphery, the border of the site. It was a nightmare. All the reports had to be updated. They didn't accept that the bats hadn't moved house. They didn't accept that the trees hadn't gone. They all had to be redone. And that raised further concerns because although we'd looked at using a piled construction for the foundation, from a neighbourly point of view, we'd said, no, we can't do that. It was going to involve weeks and weeks of 12-hour-a-day pile driving, and the neighbourhood would probably just abandon us. And so we were going for a raft, a foundation built on a raft, which was much better. But clearly, and we're pleased about that as well, because the piling damages tree roots if they're around, whereas our proposal was much better. But there were more root protection issues. You may not know, but we have a fantastic tree on the site, which is a nightmare. It's called a Wellingtonia. It's massive, and it has caused a lot of money to be spent, a lot of stress, a lot of issues. It's a lovely tree, but in the end, we had to do a tree root radar scan. We had to have the site radar scan looking for tree roots, of all things. Anyway, we've got planning. We finally got approval on the 22nd of October, subject to certain conditions. And obviously, you may be familiar with, you have prior to commencement of work on site, and then you have prior to occupation. Well, we managed to satisfy the prior to commencement conditions fairly well, which involved all that about roots, drainage, and the rest of it. And so here we go. We got the conditions satisfied. We could now start negotiating the final contract. It's a bit of a shock, really, but that's that. We were now going to the JTC, the Joint Tribunal contract form, which we were using for the project, and it did progress really well. We'd been working with Keir for 8 years, and we both wanted to get it done. But then a COVID-19 event occurred. Oh dear. And loads of new clauses had to be negotiated about who took the liability if you had to stop work. Obviously, on a site like this, you have what are called prelims, the cost of just being on site. The cost of being on site down the road is about £12,000 to £15,000 a week. And if you have a delay of 6 weeks because of COVID, that's £90,000 potentially on someone's bank account. In the end, again, thanks to Keir being kind and our solicitors being quite reasonable, we agreed we don't have any liability. It's been agreed as a force majeure job, and we were able to sign the contract in May, and It was socially distanced, I hasten to add. And they said they'd be on site on the 22nd of June, which they did. Now I'm going to just show you quickly the program. Can you see that or not?
No, you'll have to run it direct, Richard.
Okay. I'm a mind it's going to take a bit of time, so I won't do that. I will go on to that one. Now that is the tail. Oh, sorry. That is just the tail end of it, showing completion of the project. This was in its full form on the 12th of July 2021. That was our desire, that we would finish if we'd had the money. However, that top line says it all. Complete construction required 4.5 million. Phase 1, which I'll explain what it gives us in a minute, which was the church finished and the whole structure and landscape, was 3.5 million. Completion for that was May 29th, 2021. And that result gave us that, which I hope you can see that.
Yes. Okay.
Right. And all we were getting now is tracing around that area there as a finished interior. All the rest would just be open space. We had one toilet because we couldn't afford any more. And that was it. So we thought, yeah, okay, let's see if we can go for that. But the fundraising had been going on for quite a while. It started with a vengeance in 2016, and from individuals with gifts and pledges over 3, 5, 10 years, lots of events, fun runs. We did get some money from the fun run for a couple of years, which was great. We went to trusts and grants, looked at about 400, and it came down to about 5 in the end that gave us some, but not a lot, I hasten to add. We had many plans, including using a superb crowdfunder application, using their UK website. And Lisa, our manager of the fundraising, had got a superb presentation there, but COVID knocked it right on the head. Crowdfunder in the end said, don't do it, not at the moment, it's too dangerous, you will not raise that much money through it. So we had to back off from that. One thing that did go well was the Lego church, and I do hope a lot of you saw that around. This was designed by Colin Revens, and then we had the joy of selling a brick at a time. And we actually sold, well, we sold enough bricks to build the whole lot, which was brilliant. It would have been nice if it had been the church that way, but it wasn't. But thank you, Colin, for your hard work on that. It's great. So November last year, bear in mind, Kia are now on site working to phase 1. They're away, they're doing it, aiming to finish in May. PCC met together and thought and prayed and said, right, okay, let's see if we can go for a final push. Let's go for see if we can raise some more pledges, debt, something that would enable us to do a bit more. And so we did. And phase 2A required 4.14 million in total, with completion promised on June the 18th. And we did it. We actually got it in a very short space of time. And the result now means that phase 1, we haven't got enough to do the first floor, but phase 1 will give us the whole of that ground floor completed, finished for use, ready for all the community to be able to access and use. And we'll look at that in a little more detail at the moment. Interesting fundraising. This is where the sources of funds for phase 1 came from the Congregation Direct. Really, in cash terms, it's probably, I don't know, probably about 1.75 million came in cash. Assets, sale of assets, which the congregation bought, was about 1.25 million, because we bought the vicarage. I don't know if you remember, we bought the vicarage and took part of the grounds and then sold it, but that was bought by the congregation. And legacies gave us 9%, charitable trust 2%, fundraising events 3%. The fundraising events were the most fun though, they were great fun. So this was what we were letting go of, and this is what we were hoping to arrive at. And this would be the rough site plan. You can get a rough idea. It pretty well fills the back half of the site, keeping a bit of the, we wanted to keep as much of the green as we could. And yeah. Ground floor would now look like this. This was a typical layout, although we can do it in the round. And this is a coffee lounge here. and a multi-use sports hall here. And there's a small hall come youth room here with a creche at the back, kitchen here and office here. First floor, if we can get around to finishes, has more offices and rooms that can be used by the community and a kitchenette up here to suit. Artist impressions, this is what we were looking to create, looking into the church, looking through sliding screens that are there into the church. And these massive structures are all wooden. They're massive wooden beams, which I saw a sample of one the other day, and they are humongous. They're massive, they're great. It's got a glass spire on it, which you won't realise until you actually see the building, a glass spire, and that's a rear view of it with the window in place. So when complete, we'll have a flexible space which can be used as a concert hall, a link to a drop-in lounge, a lounge for 125 square metres sports hall, and a smaller hall with a nursery and creche, and a commercial kitchen and an office. And if we can complete the first floor, you'll have an array of rooms there and a kitchenette of various sizes. This is the arrival on site. We're off. And last looks across before the hoarding went up. Beautiful weather, absolutely brilliant to start work. The structure to get the window out was massive, inside and out. And to watch those guys working, they were amazing. They clambered up this stuff, and there's one of the subsidence cracks you can see in the end wall of the church. It goes up through into the window and has split the window frame. There were more around the other sides of the church too, so we weren't aware it was that bad until we took the reredos down. That's the structure that was in front of the altar. And that's them easing out the panes one at a time and handing them out to their colleagues on the outside. Believe it or not, that's checking for bats. As they removed the tiles on the roof, they had to check them, each one for bats, to make sure there were none around. And if they were there, they got boxes with them to pick the bats up, put them in the boxes, and put them back into the bat boxes that we had to fasten to all the trees in the grounds while the work was going on. The new building actually has bat lodgings set in the roof, believe it or not, which is great. Which surprises me, because next door in the apartments, they have a superb bat roost, which almost, I think it's probably got jacuzzis in for them as well. It's amazing. Down the bottom of the garden, it's absolutely superb. And this is obviously the demolition moving in now, the big stuff coming in, managed in a very, this is the remains of the hall and the chapel of ease part here, with the chancel still standing there in the background. They very cleverly, actually, to avoid using massive machines, used the rubble as a ramp to get higher up to get stuff off later, which was very good. As they were working again, just to try and keep dust down for the neighbourhood, they brought in these mist sprayers to keep all the dust down from the neighbourhood, which was really good. They were all over the place. You could have a really good shower in front of them. They also brought in, environmentally thinking as well, this amazing machine. This is a crusher. It basically took all of the rubble from the buildings and crushed it. And the intention was not to bring in new hardcore or anything, but to reuse all of the building as the foundations for the new building. So that really is the remains of the old church going in to become the foundation of the new. But that machine was awesome. And again, very quiet when operating. Here we're very sensitive of warning all the neighbours of what was happening. If there was noise occurring or what was going on, they went and told the neighbours. These were pebbles that the church, there's loads of them, there's more as well, that church members were asked to fill in with names of people that they wanted to remember that would be going into the foundations. And this was the foundation laying day when we had various dignitaries and friends along, all socially distanced, I hasten to add again, to throw the stones into the foundations as they are being produced. There's Duncan the Vicar, that's, you may know Bishop David, I don't know, that's Heather Thompson who's watching at the moment, and most of you will know Andy Street, and Dame Caroline Spellman in the background. There were more, but yeah, and this is now them working on site, starting to put in the foundations, these major points of contact that the building will have. And this is now flooding on the slabs, this massive squidger that squirts cement. And they were really blessed and fortunate to have good weather to get some of these down. It would have been a nightmare in the pouring rain that came later. And here we see them starting to put up the steel structure with massive cranes. I don't know if you remember seeing that one. That was a giant. You could see it from way down the other end of Dorridge Road when it was on full extension. Absolutely amazing. And the structure slowly coming together. And that is the stairs to the upper floor, which we've had put in, and we'd love to be able to use one day, but we have got to raise some more funds to do that. And that's a view at the back of the building now. I don't know if you get a chance, it's good to look from the car park as well, but it's absolutely amazing the way it's coming up. So how far have we got so far? Let me just share this with you. It takes a couple of minutes, but hopefully you will see it. Shout if you don't, Robert, please.
Can't see it.
Oh, that's coming direct from the computer, that is. Oh, fiddle. And it worked perfectly when we did it before. Okay. Okay, I'll have a look and see if I can do anything to alter the setting, but it's fascinating. And why wouldn't that do it? Ah. Okay. Yeah, sorry folks, I will have a go. Okay, moving in, I'll try it in a moment. Again, moving back into the interior. You've probably all seen the, yeah, okay, you've probably all had those through the doors at some point. This is our plea to the community to support and help us finish this thing off. We still need those extra funds, we do. You've also had an opportunity if you want to sponsor a roof tile. And that's, we've sold many roof tiles now, in fact, so please, if you're interested, have a go, take one on and see if you can do something with it. There's also a book which Meg Gilwell has written on the history of the parish and the parish church, and some of the early stuff I was talking about comes out of that book. So how far have we got? Well, we're almost there. It's brilliant, but we have this last hurdle to get over of raising the last bit of money, but such is life. But some people have said, well, why have you done it? What's you done it for? And really, it's simple. We really wanted to put the heart back into the heart of Dorridge. The centre was used in its old days, and it really was popular and well used. And we just wanted to put that heart right back into the heart of Dorridge. It's just a natural thing. We wanted to do it. And whilst that community centre is nearly twice as large as a church, the whole building is designed for community use. It's not just a church, it is a concert hall, it's whatever you want to make it. We want it to meet the needs of the young in the community, the older in the community, the lonely, those that we need to stay in touch with, to support. And it's for everyone. And, you know, it's amazing really when we think back to how this has started. After going for nearly 10 years, it started as the pandemic struck, and it's going to actually open as we come out. And we see it like a beacon of hope for everyone, for us all, that the tentative opening date is the 4th, 5th of September weekend. So make a note of that. If you're around and not on holiday, do drop in and see us. There'll be more publicity going out about that. But we just believe that it was perfect timing. God's got perfect timing for opening that place up.